Hello and welcome to Monday Morning Message number 6. So today we are going to be covering pages 29 through 33 in your textbook. Some of this is going to be a little redundant because I realized that I actually got ahead of myself a little bit on a few things. So the first item, just kind of backtrack a little bit, right? The sharing passwords, because that actually comes up here on page 29, and I mentioned it last week. But don't forget, not a good idea to share passwords with anybody. So again, if one of your colleagues, one of your coworkers can't remember their password or lost their password, just direct them back to whoever gives out passwords or whoever sets those or resets passwords. So if that's the supervisor, if it's the privacy officer, if it's the information technology or IT department, then direct them to go there. Don't give your password. This part here on page 30, I actually kind of like unauthorized software. You should never download any software onto a company computer without the correct and proper authorization. Unfortunately, this can lead to potentially harmful viruses. It can lead to damage. Possibly to the hard drive. It could be a very serious situation if that happens to you. I've actually seen this happen in the real world, happened in a private practice that I worked at, where some malicious software was downloaded by accident, but nonetheless, it created a lot of problems. It required resetting all the servers, and it cost the practice a fair amount of money to get all that done. So the only people that should be downloading any software to a company or an office computer should be whoever's in charge of doing such a thing. This is true, in most places, most jobs. It's typically fairly common. Fairly common too that you won't be able to download any software if certain safeguards have been put into place. I can tell you. At our college, we as faculty are not allowed to download any software to a computer without getting that approved through our IT department, and then they download whatever we request. So that's very common in larger organizations, managed care organizations such as Kaiser. Okay, unauthorized hardware. This is another good one. I would tell you never to hook up any personal devices, any USB drives, anything like that that are not company authorized or approved. You do not want to run the risk of, number one, damaging something, downloading a virus onto your company's computer. But the other key piece of that is you don't want to take any PHI home with you, so like downloading somebody's information on your USB, and you don't want to give the impression that you might be doing that either. So never, ever use any hardware that's not been approved for use in the office. In particular, we talk about things like USB, thumb drives, flash drives, that type of thing. I don't do that unless you absolutely have permission to do so. Email security, this one's a little bit tough. Some practices use email fairly frequently. Larger organizations typically do. Smaller private practices tend to not use email as much. Part of that is because email is generally considered not to be secure. Emails, just like faxes, can get into the wrong hands. And faxes, if we go back a few weeks, I think I mentioned fax machines and about making sure that when you use a fax that you actually punch in the correct fax phone number to where you want things to go, and double check that before you hit send. Same thing with email. I mean, all it really takes is for one character to be wrong in that email address, and now somebody has protected health information that they shouldn't have received, and that could be a breach of a patient's confidentiality and their privacy, and then they could potentially file a complaint. So That's very important. Patients do have a right to file complaints. In the notice of privacy practices, there should be a section in there on how patients can file a complaint with the practice or the organization, and also how they can file a complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services. So if you're using email, then what you want to make sure, which is something that your IT department should ensure, is that email is encrypted. And encryption means that the language is coded or scrambled so that only the receiver can actually see the information. The proper receiver gets that information. So, you know, a lot of organizations encrypt a lot of data for transmission. This is above my pay grade, so I leave that type of thing to the professionals. I do know that I think that our email is encrypted or encryptable email, and that's a wonderful safeguard to make sure that information doesn't get into the wrong hands. So again, that's above my pay grade, but most organizations, they encrypt things in order to transmit things electronically via the internet. But again, it's uncommon to see emails used in smaller practices. Part of the reason for that, just kind of off topic, is that in order to send and to answer and receive emails, it requires somebody to have to sit, you know, at a computer and do such a thing. And in a smaller practice, in particular, like a private practice, the doctor really only gets paid, or the provider only gets paid, if they go into a room and see a patient. They don't get paid when they're sitting at the computer answering emails. So in smaller practices, that's why you typically don't see docs that do a lot of email, because it takes time, and we don't recoup anything. We don't get reimbursed for that type of thing. And as many emails as you could receive on a daily basis from patients or from outside entities, you would practically have to hire somebody to just sit and answer emails all day. So that's why you don't see it in smaller practices very much. Okay, protecting your laptop computers and other media, things like smartphones, cell phones, those typically we do not use those to contact patients. Again, cell phones are not secure devices. So unfortunately, you could transmit information via text. You know, voice to text is a bad idea. When it's just a bad idea to use your cell phone to contact patients or to send patients information. So virtually nobody will ever do that. Very rare instances ever to use a cell phone in a doctor's office to contact patients or share any information with them. So that's typically a no-no. You know, other things that you should probably consider is things like your own personal laptop or your tablets. Again, you don't want to plug those in to a computer at the office. You run the risk of either taking information, PHI, home with you, or giving the impression that you might be doing such a thing. So I typically recommend that you don't do those things. You don't whip out your head at your desk and on that kind of stuff. If you do, if you take it to work, and that's appropriate for things like the cafeteria or the break room, but in your work area or workstation, even giving the impression is not a good idea. So definitely be careful of that. In particular, things too, like if you had any PHI on a laptop or an iPad or anything like that, you run the risk of that being stolen, and now somebody's got information they shouldn't have. So again, not a good idea to do that. All right. Some tips for protecting laptop computers and other portable media. Of course, it says don't save any PHI on portable devices unless it's password protected or encrypted. That's true, especially in the office if we're using laptops or iPads for office for work use. We should have those things password protected and encrypted, and they shouldn't go home with you. Those things should stay in the office. Do not store passwords on devices. I know a lot of us do it. A lot of us store passwords in our cell phones, in our notepads in our cell phones, that type of thing. I admit, even I've been guilty of doing that. Bad idea. I have a notebook now that I keep at home, and that notebook is, I write all of my passwords down and keep that notebook in a secure place. And if I ever have to travel or anything with it, then I typically take it and keep it locked up with me as well. So that's a better idea than storing it on your storing passwords on your cell phone. Okay. Exercise care if you have to take anything off premises. If you are allowed to take a company laptop or an iPad home with you, you are responsible for that. So that's the type of thing that, you know, if you have PHI on any of those devices, that should never be left in your car, never be left in your car in view. Things like that will get stolen, and now we violated HIPAA, and we violated the patient's confidence and confidentiality. Backup information, anything that ever gets stored, most organizations have very stringent backup systems that back up many, many times a day as data is inputted. Portable electronic devices, I think we've kind of killed that one. But there's a couple of other things in here too, because I talked about laptops and iPads, but what about devices like an electrocardiogram, an ECG or EKG? Oftentimes with that, we will put in patient demographic information like their name, their date of birth, maybe their age, maybe height, weight, and vital signs. Some of that is PHI, it's identifiable information. And we put that in there so that when we get the recording of the EKG, that information will be on that recording. So we don't have to handwrite that in. It's already, you know, typed up as we perform the EKG. Usually what I do when I get done with a patient and I have an acceptable EKG, then I reset the patient information so that it's not still in there. That's another one that you could run into issues with. Some of the electronic glucometers where you can store information, sometimes you could store PHI in there. So things like that definitely should have some safeguards or some protocols, like resetting the patient demographic information before you move on to the next patient, you know, zeroing everything out so there's no information in there. Okay. And I think we'll leave it today with the remote access. Another one that's important, if you have access to your office's computer system from outside the office. This has become fairly common, especially you know, this year with the pandemic that we've been dealt with. We've done a lot of work at home, and a lot of us that have been able to work from home have access to, you know, through the internet, we have access to stuff that we normally have access to at work. That's another one where, in all honesty, I think you've really got to be careful with that one by making sure that you also on your home computer, if you're using your home computer, not a company issued computer, you've got to make sure that you have, you know, you've got malware stored on your devices, that you've got, you know, antivirus software, maybe ransomware on your devices, so that just in case anything that you access, you don't run the risk of, you know, downloading a virus or having information taken. So that's an important consideration if you have remote access to patient information. So just some things to consider there. I look forward to next Monday morning's message number 7, which will be the last Monday morning message in MAP54 HIPAA compliance. And we will cover pages 34 through 36. So we're almost done, guys, and I look forward to seeing you next Monday.